Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're very impressed that there's so many of you still sitting here after this very busy panels that we've had, and dual panels. We've had these small sessions along with the main event. I'm Ileana Pina. I'm the quality chief for Thomas Jefferson, and for full disclosure, I'm a medical officer at the FDA, but I am here as my clinical job. And we have a fantastic panel here of good friends. Biswajit is going to be my co-director here, co-chair. We have Uriel, whom I've known for a long time. And we said he's famous, that's why everybody's here. from Columbia Presbyterian. We have Bob Kormos, also known to me for many, many years. We were the initial heart failure transplant LVAD group. He is now retired, but I'm sure he's working as hard as ever. Ken Stein, again, a good colleague from New York. You're still living in New York, aren't you? All right. And we've worked together even through the FDA and clinically as well. We have Jeff Kloss, who I just had a wonderful conversation with, has an MBA. That's a really scary title behind his name. Bobby Boguet, I know you go by Chapman now, but Bobby Boguet and I have also been friends for a long time, and also part of that MCS world that we all deal with. Tim Henry from Christ Hospital, down the road from Cleveland in Cincinnati, another good friend, also a heart failure transplant person. So this is kind of a neat program because there is no prescribed lecture. Nobody has slides. And what we're trying to do here is do a little projection into the future. And so I'm going to ask each of our colleagues here, who all come from different parts of the science world, what do they see the future coming? I do not remember another time in my 30 years of doing heart failure that we've had so many drugs, so many devices, so many things to offer the patients. We're now talking about social issues. We're talking about what the patients can afford. We're talking about insurance. And all these things wrap together to the totality of the care that we give the patients. And I can't remember another time that we've had so many choices of what the right things to do are for the patients. And I don't know about you, but I see sick patients, and they are a lot sicker than they were 20 years ago. By the time we get them, they have so many comorbidities and so many problems. Not always well medicated, not always well treated, but that environment is out there, and it's a very different environment. So with that sort of entry point, would you like to give us your thoughts?
Who can add anything to what Ileana has to say? But I think what we're interested in the next several minutes is to dissect the trifecta of three things. One is furthering science, working with the economics of that part, and the regulatory environment. The less is spoken these days is less, but the current regulatory dispensation. In this, how can we take this field forward? Because as you know, in shock, it's a very industry-supported endeavor, because we can't just do it alone. So industry has expectations from us as clinicians and hospitals, and we have expectations from the industry, and that is the interface we need to work together, because we have to work together and find solutions. And there are a lot of headwinds, and some of that we'll see the challenges they face. So this will be an open debate, like she said, open discussion, and audience participation will be great. I'm sure you all have your own questions, all issues, so we'll welcome that. For us, it's a little difficult to see you on the light if you raise your hands. So there are mics on the two sides. Just walk over there. I think we can see you better. Especially that mic is more visible than this one. So having said that, just want to have an opening statement of each one of them. I'll come one by one, so that what your thoughts are. So, Nir.
So first of all, thank you for having me here. And actually, I like this. This is an open concept, and we can just throw up whatever we think about it. And I would say we're in 2025, and let's say 2030, only 5 years from now. I do think we're going to practice very, very different cardiogenic shock. Several things in my eyes, will change. heart failure, that cardiogenic shock is the extreme aspect of it, is going to be pushed to become something that will be at home with a lot of empowering of patients to manage themselves. I do believe that the chronicity of heart failure is supposed to be mostly taken care as an outpatient and mostly by empowering the patient. Leaving the hospital the opportunity to really focus on the extreme side of the heart failure that is the cardiogenic shock. If I'm breaking it down specifically, I do think that first of all, the recognition of cardiogenic shock is lacking. We are here sitting in a room. The patient that we succeed to save are the patients that are lucky that someone recognizes that they have cardiogenic shock. So the first thing that I see changing is utilization of algorithm, maybe based on artificial intelligence, maybe we'll base about just analytics that we'll have to alert us in a live and immediate time that this patient required specific attention because he fell into one of the categories for cardiogenic shock, B, C, D, and of course E. Number two, as the hospital will be much more based on critical care rather than chronicity of care, there will be an opportunity to have a wide variety of technology, all the way from mechanical circulatory support to medication that we're going to see some more medication that now reviving themselves. There is Instarastics that is coming out as a medical therapy for cardiogenic shock again. We see omecamtiv mecarbil trying to do a place in the severe heart failure trajectory of those style of patients. Side by side with, as mentioned before, Bobby probably will say about the transvalvular LVAD, so we have right now only the Impella, but Supera and Magentum and so many other devices going to be into it. I do think also the AI is going to take part of how we manage and alert ourselves with adjusting those technologies to make sure that adverse event will be reduced. And the last thing I will mention, I do think that in cardiogenic shock, we always need to think what is the next step. Native heart recovery is the goal, and this is supposed to be, and I hope to see it get into much more percentage than each now, but definitely the transition from patients that cannot have native heart recovery probably need to be more smoother with some more adaptation that need to happen. The last thing I will mention, the majority of the people sitting in the room are very lucky to work in centers that have cardiogenic shock program. I do think 5 years from now, we'll need to see cardiogenic shock program in every hospital in the community, exactly like we have epidemiological program to identify sepsis and other elements. Not that they will have to take care of the patient throughout the course of the shock, but the identification and transferring the patient will be done in a different way.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Congress for having me here. I'm kind of not quite Bud Fraser ilk, but I'm getting there. But having said that, I look at the future of cardiogenic shock and I see it in front of me. This is a remarkable collection of scientists, clinicians, nurses, a multidisciplinary group of young minds that I think will bring us to the future. And I'm so pleased to see the breadth of the type of attendee at this meeting and how much this meeting has grown. We hear a lot about artificial intelligence and machine learning and how it's going to change medical practice, and it most certainly will. However, in shock, we need data. We don't have all the metrics required yet to be able to do the analyses, I think, that will help us improve both the quality of care and the total outcome of cardiogenic shock. We're getting there. And I might get into it later, but I think this will involve things like sensors that detect various substances and byproducts of shock, such as lactate. It'll require looking at more complex biomarkers that we're not yet ready to propel into on-site detective work. In other words, where are the where is the equipment for point-of-care testing of things like high-sense troponin and other things that indicate the progress of advanced heart failure. So we have some work to do to get those elements into the equation. But I also want to point out one other important thing that's here with us today are the experts. Besides the data that you put into a formula for machine learning and AI, there's one critical component that's really important to add, and that is knowledge. And expert knowledge is something, it's that intuitive thing when you walk into the ER and you look at a patient and you look at your coordinators and you say, this guy's not going to do well. And they look at you like, how do you know this? Well, it comes with years of experience and insight into the disease process and how treatment leads to outcome. That is available, but that's not being put yet into the equation of machine learning and AI, but it has to be. I think that we're going to see more and more of this. I think the technology revolution that we're seeing is fantastic. We need more competitive devices in all areas of mechanical circulatory support. I think that's important as we move forward in the future, and it's starting to happen. I think we're in a very interesting phase right now. And I want to point out something that I think is very important, is how do we finance and fund new research and new technology and new development? Industry is not unlimited in its finances. You know, many of you clinicians believe that industry is, uber wealthy and should be able to produce the next technology in 6 months. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way because industry has responsibilities to the FDA, to patients, to you, to provide products that are safe and effective. And that takes time and money. Well, we can do that in a combination that isn't looked on very favorably right now, and that is how can we develop the synergy between academic institutions, NIH, NHLBI, and industry. It existed years ago. It kind of went down a little bit, but I think it's something that will help us move forward in the treatment and recognition of shock that we have to consider. We could talk more, but I've said enough. But I think the future is bright as we recognize where these synergistic initiatives can happen.
Yeah, so Ken, I should start with two important disclosures. Just again, again, speaking from an industry standpoint, I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Boston Scientific. Probably the more important disclosure is I'm an electrophysiologist. So usually when people talk about shocks with me, it's a very different kind of shock we're talking about. I want to just start very high level because, from a technology standpoint, the future is absolutely bright. From a political and macroeconomic environment, I am as concerned about our ability to continue the pace of innovation in bringing meaningfully new therapies to bear on patients in this country or anywhere across the globe. I am as concerned as I ever have been. Very worried about what's going on with our regulatory colleagues in this country, very worried about what's going on with CMS, very worried about what's happening to the global economy. Last session, there are a lot of people who were asking for cheaper devices. That is not happening in the current environment. And in fact, the issue is going to be how much more expensive is everything going to have to be with the disruptions to global supply chains. Having said that, though, I think if we can make it through those concerns, which are largely out of any of our control, there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic. And maybe just in I don't know if this is reverse order of what you're all thinking about. I mean, the obvious one is just continued iterations in technology. And then the technologic capabilities are really incredible at this point. We at THT this year presented the first human use data on our mechanical circulatory support device, which we call Vitalist. We've recently announced we've spun out a very novel technology for managing cardiorenal syndrome. The number of startups in this space, in the interventional heart failure space, overall is incredible. And there's no lack of good ideas, and there's absolutely no lack of good engineering talent. I think going one step further than that, I think what has to happen if we're really going to meaningfully improve outcomes, and one fact that I think is discouraging, but it points to the opportunity. With all of the pharmacologic innovation over the past decade, with all of the new devices over the past decade, heart failure outcomes in the United States have not meaningfully improved, even if you discount the impact of COVID. And that's true about overall mortality, that's true about sudden cardiac death mortality, that's true about cardiovascular hospitalizations. Right? And I think the key to overcoming that is getting better use of AI and better use of physiologic monitoring of patient condition. And whether that's traditional blood-drawn biomarkers, or I think more likely, whether that's making more use of data from wearables, more use of data from implantables, right? But to track patients' condition and enable earlier intervention as patients decompensate. Because if you wait until it's too late, then you have waited until it's too late. And then the last thing, right, the best way to manage shock in a patient is to not have that patient go into shock in the first place, right? And the revolution now in cardiovascular preventive medicine, particularly advances in treatment of cardiometabolic disease. And a lot of attention right now to the GLPs and the various pharmacologic drugs for managing cardiometabolic disease. Also device-based therapies that are coming very shortly in terms of minimally invasive bariatric surgery, in terms of minimally invasive approaches to ameliorating cardiometabolic disease, is really what's going to take, I think, to move the needle.
Well, I'm honored to be here. I'm the ordinary business guy among all these incredible clinicians up here. So I'm going to talk about things I know about, which is the business challenges. We've got great engineering, as we talked about. So if you think about it, you've got patient needs, we've got great engineering, innovation. We can do that work. We've got great clinicians that can deploy that and help us. And in between those two is the hard work. And the hard work really is, and it's not regulatory, to be frank. The FDA has been terrific. The FDA is incredibly collaborative, flexible, at least up through a couple of weeks ago. We'll find out what's going to happen going forward. But the FDA, it's not a regulatory challenge. Quite frankly, it's a challenge of conducting a clinical trial for a small company, unlike my colleagues on either side of me who have a lot more resources than we do. It is incredibly challenging. And let's just start with, you get an IDE approval to conduct a pivotal study. And you're just so excited, you're like, we're there, we're done. Well, now you talk to your first hospital, and you're likely not going to get the approval to start that study for 6 months. So you've got 6 months of no activity after this great IDE approval to start your pivotal study. And that's one hospital. And you need to add 10, 20, 30, 40. Contracts, budgets, IRBs. Every one of them is individually blocking and tackling. And the incredible amount of resources that it takes to just get to the point where you can even have a conversation with a patient about an informed consent is an incredible lift. And back to the, can industry sponsor all this stuff? We only have so much money. And while all that's happening, we're continuing to pay engineers, do all of our research, right? We have this huge burn rate. So I think we've got to find a way to do a better job of streamlining this clinical trial process. And it's not just, our device, it's every device that, that we're talking about up here. How do we make it easier to get that done, to get the clinical data that we need to make decisions? There's just huge administrative obstacles. The most recent one is insurance. I think, Dr. Pina mentioned that one. Unbelievable challenges with insurance. And, you get a patient who goes through the entire screening process, the eligibility committee approves them. You're all excited, and then the patient exits the study because no insurance coverage. I mean, that's incredibly frustrating for everybody involved in the system. So, kind of how we pay for this in a clinical trial, we need to do a better job and figure this out. because I would argue we're spending a lot of time and resources that are not really going to the best use. And how do we make that more efficient? And you guys deal with it every day in a clinical trial setting, right? We deal with it on the business side. So I think we really need to figure out how to address that. That's going to make getting innovation to the market more efficient, easier, more cost effective. But it's a challenge right now for sure.
First of all, I want to say, Biswajit and Marwan, congratulations. This is a phenomenal conference. I'm honored to be here. I'm so proud to have been from the Texas Medical Center. And when I came to the conference, it's palpable energy. You can see the excitement. You've really brought together the experts across the world about shock. And it's only that collaborative effort that we're going to advance shock care and improve patient outcomes. And it truly is a partnership. On the industry side, and as you know, for many years I was on the clinical side, engineers can't design a device without a partnership with clinicians. They are critically dependent on the voice of customer to tell us what are your unmet needs, how can the device be better, and it's not just designing a device, selling it, putting it on a shelf. It's a continuous, iterative process to improve that device, to ensure it's both safe and effective, but it's providing the patient needs, and that's critical. I do see two huge areas of opportunity that won't change without us working together. One is access to care. We know many patients aren't diagnosed, they aren't referred in. When they are referred in, they arrive in SCI-DE shock, and they've missed their window of opportunity to have a good outcome. And so we need to work together to build systems of care that promote early identification, early transfer to appropriate centers where patients can receive care. And again, that doesn't happen in silos. We're going to all have to work together to understand how to achieve that goal. We saw data today about patients who live in rural communities have a much higher mortality rate. They're not being recognized. We don't have treatments available to them. And so we need to figure out how to close those healthcare gaps together. And then the second one is the promotion of heart recovery. We're good with heart replacement therapies. With transplant, we have great survival rates. And with durable VADs. Where it's much more unclear is the exit strategy that promotes keeping your native heart and achieving either a state of recovery or remission. How do we do that? What devices do we need? How do we need to complement those devices with medical therapy to achieve meaningful results for patients? And too many times when I'm out visiting hospitals, there's a fear among physicians and teams about pursuing heart recovery because we don't have great data. What does that look like for patients? How do we achieve it? What are the results that we can communicate to patients so that they can anticipate what their survival rate would be? And I'll say, we are working on a trial, and I can talk about that later. I don't want to take too much time. But just recently, Federico Pappalardo published his results looking at Impella 5.5 in patients who left with their native heart. These were 20 consecutive patients. And he aggressively initiated GDMT while on support, had a 95% survival rate at 180 days after discharge. That competes with transplant and VAD. That's a meaningful number that we can have a conversation with a patient about pursuing a strategy that might delay their need for transplant or at least a meaningful recovery remission strategy. And again, that's not going to happen in a silo with just industry. It's a true partnership for all of us to make that happen.
All right, so now I'm last at the end of the panel, and I thought initially I would just say, oh, I agree with everyone else. But instead, maybe I expanded a thing. So I think there's a number of really important issues that I'll touch on briefly. Number one is prevention. Best place we can do is to prevent that, and that's true with structural heart disease. It's clear that early treatment of aortic stenosis, aortic insufficiency, mitral regurgitation should be treated earlier. So, and we have the ability to do that. Second one is heart failure. So patients, and we've done a much better job with heart failure, but there's a lot more we can do, and this touches on the area of recovery. So number one, we know and we have great guideline medications and devices, but the number of patients that are actually on them turn out to be 30 or 40%. Part of it, they get started and then they stop. Another one, just to touch on economics, hospitals are in deep trouble. All hospital systems across the country are struggling from a variety of reasons, but insurance companies are doing well, and one of the big problems with compliance is, I have a patient that's LDL is perfect on a PCSK9 inhibitor, LDL's 40. 2 months later, insurance denies their recovery. I don't find out till 10 months later when they come, they're like, what happened? Why is your LDL 177? Oh, insurance stopped my PCSK9 inhibitor. This is a big, big issue for us to do prevention. If we really want guideline-based medications, people do it. And then weight loss management is another. So prevention's huge. That's true in acute myocardial infarction. We've done much better. And we really, if we do it well and we have good systems of care, you should have incredible outcomes. But across the world, STEMI is increasing. And especially in South Asia, in Malaysia now, the average age of a STEMI patient is under 40 years old when they present. And then numbers are increasing. So this is a worldwide problem. Structural acute MI, heart failure is prevention. And we would do better if we start there. The second part I would say is I really want to comment about systems of care. So, and maybe I'll start with this. Last week there was an announcement, the American Heart Association had said they took away volume requirements for STEMI and stroke. Shocking to me, just shocking to me. What we have is too many STEMI systems doing too few number of patients. And what we know is systems of care, large regional systems do this better. You know, we started the Minneapolis Heart STEMI system in 2002. We had 38 hospitals sent there. We were doing 500 to 600 STEMIs per month. Then we started out a hospital cardiac arrest and cardiogenic shock. Very safe and easy to transfer those places to one place where you have the ability to do a wide spectrum of things. If you look at cardiogenic shock around the United States now, the places that have excellent systems, and this includes well worked out shock teams with well worked out shock algorithms, with registries where they keep track of their data and adjust their algorithms to what the data shows. And that's the places that are then equipped to be in well-designed clinical trials. We need more of them. And in fact, it's not, I mentioned this yesterday. In our STEMI system, in a Danish STEMI system, the mortality from acute myocardial infarction in the hospital is under 2%. That's not what happens in the United States. We published the data from American Heart Association registry. Patients who present to a non-PCI hospital, only 17% are being treated in time. Because we have very poor systems of care that you can look around and state by state and look at it. We just have done it poorly. And we know the data, we know how it works. But going backwards and saying there's no volume requirements, really, if you have your mom comes to the hospital with acute MI in cardiogenic shock, do you want to be at a site that does 5 STEMIs a year and 1 cardiogenic shock patient? Really? I think it's just shocking, and I don't understand how that could possibly happen. So I think it's really important to do it the opposite way. We need to, care right now is so sophisticated and so requires multidisciplinary teams. You need to be in places that can do it. And for shock, that includes not just the acute treatment, putting in MCS, which MCS, managing MCS, taking out the MCS, all critically important, and then having an end game. What do you do with LVAD treatments and cardiac transplant? Because most are not going to recover acutely, a large share of them in the acute cardiogenic shock. So anyway, those are my comments, and I might be controversial, but we need not more centers, we need fewer centers that have higher volume and are able to do the complexity of patients.
Since you were controversial, I'll have a challenging view why AHA came to that so that you answer. Let's take, for example, any procedure you take. Any procedure, say stroke or TAVR or mitral clip. You're absolutely right. As you do more volumes, your outcomes get better, your complications get better. So just an arbitrary number, you have a 98% survival. But in a low volume hospital, which you heard this morning in rural New Mexico, they do half your volume, not even half, quarter your volumes, but their survival rates are 80%, which is far worse than 98%. But accessibility of care is very important. That rural guy cannot come to Texas Medical Center or to your center. So they are denied that access, and denial of access increases mortality by 50%. So to balance the two, they are trying to see if can reduce the numbers a little, accept a little lesser outcome, but have better accessibility for this life-saving surgery. So what is your counterpoint?
Yeah, so it's partnership and collaboration. So we had 38 hospitals we worked very closely with, in Minneapolis. We do the same in Ohio, but it's more challenging in Ohio because in Ohio, if you have a cath lab, they require you to have a 24-hour access. And we show in Minneapolis from 200 miles away, you can transfer people, and the outcomes are the same as if you're 2 miles from the hospital. The same.
STEMI and stroke, that won't be true.
What?
Time-sensitive procedures
Yes,
like
even
STEMI
though
and
it's
stroke.
time-sensitive, but you do it. You have to have it set up ahead of time. And you work with the communities. You have a plan in place. And these patients would be flying in. They're flying in before they even call us. It can't be cardiology dependent. You have to have a system of care that does that. And then you work with the system to provide feedback to them so that you know it, right? And most of the care still occurs in the local community. 98%. But for specific things, you're actually able to do it, and you have ways to transport people that are very quick. But it has to be done at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You have to work with sites. You have to provide feedback in sites, and that's when it works really well. And so I think it's doable. I will tell you, I've gone not only just all around the United States, but all around the world. Every site, every location has their challenges. Work them out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with the other systems, and then you can develop a system that works.
And don't wait until 4 o'clock in the morning when you don't have anything else to offer the patient. You know, we started saying this back in the 90s when quality started to become an interesting piece of what we do. And we wrote a paper about what are the 3 things that you need in a quality program. This was Harlan Krumholz, myself, some other folks. And we said there are 3 things you need. You need, number 1, guidelines. You need, number 2, a commitment to following the guidelines. And obviously that was a little bit more nebulous then and much clearer now. And the third one was have a relationship with the people that you're going to need at 4 o'clock in the morning, but form those relationships at 9 o'clock in the morning. So that at 4 o'clock in the morning, when you're in trouble, you've got somebody to call. And they were very simple. But that was like 20 years ago that we wrote that.
Since you're also the medical officer in the FDA, and we talked about guidelines, we had this debate yesterday. I think Tim was part of that debate. That guidelines are saying ECMO is level 3 harmful. When all of us sitting here in this room know there are cases which can be saved by ECMO. So there was a question, are you exposing yourself to a medical legal challenge that if you're doing a procedure in a patient who otherwise has a condition which has a 50% mortality, and you're doing ECMO which is harmful by guidelines, and you're still doing it.
Well, we have to remember the guidelines for that, just that, guides. And there's a point that you need to have the experience and the people that know what they're doing whenever this happens. So guidelines are being changed a lot, and we're not waiting 3 or 4 years to put out a new one. We have these now systems that we can move pretty quickly. Europe will probably have their new heart failure guidelines this coming year. Their last one was 23, but they're much more fragile, not fragile, agile at getting the guidelines out than we are. Ours is a much more cumbersome process.
But Europe made the balloon pump level 3 harmful, and the incidence of use of balloon pumps is still going up.
Based on their own European data. Yeah.
But I think it's always, when we write guidelines, and each one of us was sitting on different guidelines committee, sometimes words matter. And I brought it yesterday also in one of the sessions that I was very upset that they put it, not because of the people that sit here in the room and know how to read the guidelines and know that the words that actually matter over there is routine. Routine use of ECMO may be helpful, and actually that's what they try to say, but the problem is that...
uses ECMO routinely?
Exactly. ECMO is not a routine.
It's
so that's
not a routine procedure.
So as I said, this probably should have been phrased differently. I completely agree with you. But I will tell you something. The guidelines are not going to delay the progression of cardiogenic shock. Cardiogenic shock is moving fast forward, much faster than the guidelines, because if we will wait for the guidelines, we'll be way behind. I think what I actually have to take it Kent, is what you said is what stressed me the most. And I have to say, you throw a bomb here into the room that is the right bomb, is we move the field forward in multiple ways. There is always the academic, that is the NIH-funded style of research, AHA, society-funded research. There is the philanthropy, and there is, of course, the industry. And I think each one of them in different level is on a question mark because of what you said. So we have a commitment that we need to see how we are going to force the field to move forward, but this is one of the biggest things. But actually I want to bring another thing that I'm a little bit concerned in the field of cardiogenic shock that I love so much. There is a change in behavior in societies. And the change in behavior in society put now much more emphasis and probably so, and it's correct, the current generation teach us a lot, the Z generation, even the X generation. They teach us, the millennial and the Z, they teach us that work-life balance matter. Cardiogenic shock is the opposite of work-life balance, okay? Yeah. And in this room, I see committed group of people. But as we see this change in the work-life balance, change completely the work toll in the world. The question, how can we make cardiogenic shock something, that part of the future of cardiogenic shock, to make sure that it's not something that people pass through in their career rather than can have a career.
Just a really quick comment about guidelines. Completely agree with the guidelines, and this comes into economics. So we have lots of data that shows that treating with lowering your lipids, weight management, et cetera, will decrease the care for that person over time, present hospitalizations. But who cares? The insurance companies don't care. They care about 1 year. Medicare, Medicaid don't care. They care about 1 year. If you look at Canada or Great Britain that have systems that are challenged, they don't care. No one's looking at 20 years. They're looking at 1 year. So this is a challenge with guideline-based medication because you start it and then someone stops it. And I'll tell you another one, microvascular disease. I'm doing a ton of microvascular disease now, huge unmet need in multiple different areas. It's in the guidelines that you should diagnose. The average person, 70% are women, they've had chest pain for 10 years, they've seen 3 different cardiologists, they've had 4 angiograms or CT angiograms, they've had more than 5 stress tests, and you know what they don't have? a diagnosis. So it's in the guidelines that you should do invasive testing to know what they have. And you know what? 30% of the time, it's denied. It's guidelines, but you can't get it.
Right in the insurance. Great points. Because we are limited in time, I'll go a little more specific and then come back to Ileana. The biggest problem we are all sitting and we've discussed for 2-3 days is, like Ileana also said, we need guidelines, we need better knowledge, and the knowledge which is actionable comes from randomized controlled trials, good data. Shock is such a thing which is the intersection of ethics, logistics, cost, and regulation. How do we, I'll start with Bob and then go forward and then come back to the panel here. How will we design a randomized controlled trial for mechanical support in shock? Bob.
Well, first of all, I mean, you can run practical trials from registries, and I think we've underutilized that pool of data. The American Heart Association has a shock registry. I'm on that steering committee, and they've grown like massively in 1 year. I think they're up to 10,000 patients now. And there's a tremendous amount of data. And the goal of that is to create a platform where you can create trials from within that registry. And we need more of that. In fact,
So you're saying registry randomized trials rather than a randomized controlled trial?
well, you
Is
can
that
do
what
them. There are ways of doing that. But here, I want to be a little careful here because I heard several people comment on a principle that is more than just important. It's critical. You know, we're talking about, and you're not going to want to hear this because you're here to talk about shock, but you're talking about shock in the C, D, and E categories. What about A and B?
That's a different conference.
No, it
This is shock. We're going to talk about shock.
It affects us all. And you know, the recognition of shock at that level.
I get that part. But again,
It's
because
important.
of sake of time, I want to have the discussions more on shock because that is the reason why we are all sitting here.
You can
I cannot overstate the use of prevention and to avoid shock with good judgment than to bail out with good skills. I get that part. But now that there's a patient in shock, how do we manage? Because those patients are all going to keep coming. So,
Yeah, so on the, this may be higher level than you want to then. I think the key going forward on trials, right, is understanding how to make the entire trial process more efficient and more patient-friendly. How do we make greater use of data that is collected in routine clinical care as part of the endpoints in trials? How do we make better use of data that comes direct from patients? Again, their wearables, their implantable devices, so that patients aren't having to come back in for their checks in, you know, whatever the academic medical center is where they were enrolled in the trial to get more data. How do we do this in a way that prevents patient attrition in our trials? We are right now running a very large registry-based RCT. I mean, this is as controlled and randomized as a trial can get in the Nordics. Actually, in Denmark, this is a management of chronic heart failure, not shock trial. Operationally, it turns out to be a lot easier to do that kind of work in Northern Europe than it is in the United States because of some of the morass of regulations around research conduct in the United States. But it's a much more practical way of getting this data. I do want to react a little bit to the notion that the only way to do causal inference is via a randomized trial. It is undoubtedly the case that randomization is the best way to do causal inference. But we all make causal inferences every day through observational data. I mean, you know, if I drop this microphone, I know to a very high degree of likelihood it's going to fall. And that's without anyone ever doing randomization to prove that gravity exists, okay? Hopefully no one here smokes anymore. That's purely based on observational inferential data. And it is also therefore important for us to figure out how do we get as much causal inference data as we can from the routine clinical care of patients and the use of real-world evidence. Because if we have to randomize everything, then we end up randomizing nothing because we just can't afford to do that.
I think shock centers.
But I'll just caution you, Calif, who's the head of FDA, his stated line in TCT in front of 10,000 people was, in God we trust, but for everything else there's a randomized controlled trial. So that's the way they look at it. Oh,
I have questions.
sorry,
from-
can't hear
from
you.
The audience?
Can the mic be put on there? Because I can't hear you.
Gavros?
Stavros and
you?
Phyllis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Phyllis just asked the people to turn on the mic. Thank you so much. So, great discussion. I have a comment and a question related to what mentioned earlier about the accelerated path to heart transplantation in shock patients. And that was done with good intentions, as you know, as we always do things with good intentions. And for the people in the room that they don't work in heart transplant programs, or they're in Canada like Phyllis, with a new allocation, if you are in cardiogenic shock and the kidneys come back and you are now transplantable, you have a way to be transplanted very quickly, which we didn't have before 2018. So in relation to what you guys said about heart recovery, what happened after this, within a month after this change, when you went from the old to the new allocation system, we got the data from Yunus, actually Nir and his team in Colombia worked with us on this, and it dropped 8 to 9 times down within just a month, and moving forward, 8 to 9 times down the patients that they were recovering, and they were just going directly to transplant. And this shows, of course, that the patients didn't change within a month. They have not changed, they're the same. But it shows that leadership meetings are the one that you're doing now, and conferences like this, they need to come up with ways so we can influence policy, because policy changes dictate what's going to happen at the front lines. And our colleagues, they have reasons they're doing that, and they're also out of good intention. They think that maybe by doing that, they're helping their patients, because if they don't recover, they're not going to be able to transplant them easy later. And now they have an opportunity for them. And so what we have done, and Nir co-signed that, and Bob, and I know Bobby is supportive of it as well, we got together and we submitted with 100 people co-signing from every major academic medical center of this country, a proposal, which we would like you guys to support as well, incentivizing what Bobby and Bob talked about. And Phyllis, you're not aware of that. Essentially, we are using the kidney safety net. So the UNOS has a conceptual precedent about that, saying, don't go and transplant heart and kidney together. Just go for the heart. The kidneys may recover. And if you need the kidney later, we will give it you with a priority during the first year after heart transplant. This way, they incentivize people to leave the kidneys, organs, the donation, for somebody else. And we're using this same conceptual precedent in order to ask them to incentivize what you guys talked about, heart recovery in shock patients. Essentially telling them, try to recover these shock patients. Don't transplant them directly. And if they don't recover, we will give you the donor heart with the priority that you would have, right? And you're giving away in order to try recovery with a temporary or midterm or durable VAD. So this concept needs leaders like you to support it and effectively push it forward through the forums that they make policy changes. Because as you just heard, when we published this in JAC 2 years ago with the Columbia group, the University of Utah group and the Columbia group, people were like, oh my God, within a month we changed by 9 times how we practice. And the patients have not changed within a month, right?
Phyllis, could you go there, and then we'll come back to the panel.
So we've been doing that in Canada now forever. So this is where Canada's ahead of the US, but that's great. My comment is to go back to the registries that exist and to harmonize them to do the nested clinical trials that provide the inferential data that we need. There are many registries that are collecting different CRFs. We just need to we need to get our act together as a community and actually do the kind of work that needs to be done, because the next randomized control trial, we don't have 10 years to wait for the next randomized control trial. We saw how difficult it was to finish Danger, and to be very specific with our questions. We're not going to be able to compare one device to the next, like that's not going to happen, but we have tens of thousands of patients in international registries. We have biospecimens. We can ask really important questions and do nested clinical trials. Why are we not doing that? What are we waiting for?
Thank you. Ileana?
Yeah, so two comments to that one. We have the Heart Failure Collaborative, which is mostly heart failure, that we have already come up with a CRF that's acceptable to everyone that's participated, and we're starting to use that. And that's one way to do it, because we all got together and said, yes, we need to do this, and we had some leadership. The other one is the American Heart Association Precision Platform, which will allow an investigator to come and bring in a project that they want to do. You have to be written up correctly with the statistics and everything else, and it's all put into this precision bunker, I call it, literally. And all these statistics are done. So those are big groups that have agreed to do these things. And maybe there should be a shock collaborative of what data we want to collect for shock. And the stuff that you don't need, get rid of it and just use what you need to answer whatever basic question you're asking. So that's just an example.
We've done that.
Yeah, Bobby, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah. So two things on AMI shock as far as trials. Danger shock took 10 years to enroll. There was a lull after 5 years and needed additional funding to finish enrollment. But also lessons learned from Danger shock. We didn't see incorporation of best practices throughout all the Danger shock sites, which led to the high adverse event rates that we see. 40% of the patients had pre-PCI support. We already know that that's a best practice. There were no closure devices. So as we look at designing new clinical trials, it's important first to validate those best practices with any device and make sure they're incorporated in a clinical trial. Now, unfortunately, the DSMB for Recover 4, which did incorporate all of those best practices, said it was unethical to randomize patients in the setting of AMI shock after the results of Danger shock were announced. So we are moving forward with OASIS, which will be a single-arm study incorporating the best practices in the setting of AMI shock to focus primarily on the adverse event rates and get those down. When we look at heart failure shock, it's even more challenging to design a trial because they're a very heterogeneous patient population, first and foremost from the etiology of shock and progression, but also from the exit strategy. So the exit strategy will largely determine what your survival rates if you are bridge to transplant, bridge to durable VAD. But now we're starting to see the bridge to recover patients have similar or comparable survival rates. What's not captured, even in many of these registries, is what is the clinical intent when you put in a temporary support device and when you explant it. We know many patients who have a bridge to decision may choose a palliative care approach through shared decision making, and that will influence any survival rates with a recovery pathway. So that's very difficult to figure out how to incorporate that into a clinical trial design, especially when you're looking at composite endpoints who may have varying exit strategies. So the bottom line is we're doing some small pilot studies to first and foremost validate best practices, look at defining patient populations to study to inform future pivotal trials. And we're also collaborating with many of the registries to look at either a digital twin or a comparator. But unfortunately, most of these registries have not captured what we talked about today. What GDMT meds are these patients being discharged in? What is their follow-up after hospital discharge? Is anybody addressing the other comorbidities? And that's the missing element in real-world registries. And even when we've looked at Truvada, which is a large patient population, only 10% of the patients with a diagnosis of shock even have a lactate available. So that's what makes real-world data and registries challenging, is sometimes they're missing these critical elements.
You know, and just to coddle in on what you just said, we know about post-discharge and heart failure, and we know that the post-discharge clinics work. And I heard in the previous session presentations about post-shock survival clinics. What we do in our, I call it brown bag, because we say to the patients, put all your medicines in a brown bag and bring them in. And you see what they got in the hospital, what they have sitting at home, you know, what they have under the sink, everywhere else. And then we do that prognostication treatment. We up-titrate those drugs, and we start to address the other things, like coronary disease. You can't treat heart failure and ignore coronary disease. EP, you know, I work with EP sort of in my corner here. They're around the corner, and I'm running back constantly to them because we have learned so much from the wearables about rhythms and what rhythms trigger what and what to do about them. So that now I look for what is an EP reason that this patient isn't doing any better. So maybe that should be, there should be a white paper about those clinics. And you have already started doing some of that, Bobby.
We need to change our mindset about these shock patients and think of them more as we do transplant or VAD patients. They need to have the same intensity of follow-up when they leave the hospital.
Exactly.
Our transplants we see once a week for a month, then every 2 weeks. Similar with our VAD patients, many times these shock patients are being discharged. Their first visit might be at 30 days, if then. We're looking
2
at
weeks to 10 days.
Yes, we're doing a clinical
Or 10
trial with
days to 2
5/5 and
weeks.
GDMT. We're seeing them at 1 week, 2 weeks, 30 days,
Yeah.
60 days, 90
We
days.
see them weekly. We see them weekly.
We are running out of time, so we have to close. So I will give 15 seconds each, so that if you last minute thing, Tim, you were wanting to say something, 15 seconds.
Yeah, I think if shock centers that are dedicated to having algorithms with registries that use the same thing and are dedicated to put people in clinical trials, but we need a larger number of patients in fewer centers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bobby?
I would agree with systems of care, and we need to look at the entire patient journey in shock.
Thanks, Jeff.
I just think increased collaboration between the hospital system level and the companies trying to conduct these clinical trials is really important. We have the clinical support to do it. We need the administrative support.
I want to come back to something Ellie said. I think it's increased collaboration also within specialties in cardiology. The care has become so specialized and we've become so siloed that I'm just worried that we don't have enough opportunity for the heart failure, advanced heart failure docs to talk to the structural heart docs, to talk to the cardiothoracic surgeons, to talk to the electrophysiologists, and just to all get together. And because we all look at the same patients in very, very different ways. And I think, you know, the farther we grow apart, the worse it is for the patient.
So we look at the elephant.
But
Yeah, so I just want to leave you with one thought about how machine learning all works in this and what's a key principle. One term, one meaning. We're not there. But let's work toward it.
thank you. Neil?
So just to support Bob, we're not there, but we're going to be there because this is the future of cardiogenic shock changing completely direction.
Well, that was a great conversation. Thank you very much. I want to thank, what a privilege to be with Ileana here and all the panelists here. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all the industry support, because we didn't discuss that part. A conference like this, which is necessary for a disease entity like this, cannot be held without the support of the industry. And this year and the previous years also, there's been a tremendous support. We have more than 58 exhibitors there. And that only shows that they also mean well and they want a conference like this for free exchange of ideas. So I want to thank the industry and everyone else who have supported us. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
I wanted to say thank you again for being here. I know, we're all here care for patients and want to have an impact. I started this symposium by saying a good physician treats a disease, but a great physician treats the patient.
and I hope that we can leave here empowered with a little bit more knowledge and wisdom to have that impact wherever we go. I can't just say thank you to our industry partners without also talking about the core team with Jill, Mariah, Karen, Amanda, and Neha, who worked tirelessly with me, along with the staff of the Shock Symposium that you've seen throughout the weekend. These are not staff for the symposium. These are actually healthcare workers. These are our NPs and PAs and MAs in clinic who volunteered their time to be with us today to have hopefully an impact on your experience here. So thank you again, and hopefully we can see you again next April.
Folks, lunch is served next door in the Industry Theater. Thanks for joining us.